what if we have a position where we don't even know that we have to decide about something? Well, then it's time to really collect a couple of candidate moves in order to take a decision eventually, because if the obvious decision is wrong, then of course it's normal to find other solutions, because otherwise, well, you can just resign the game. Here we have the following position between Matteo and Demut, two grandmasters from, I think Spain and France. And White had to take the decision whether to take on e7 and survive the game or not. And well, let's check. D takes e7. It's the only way to get back the piece, because White is here in this position a piece down. So D takes e7 is the first logical move. But we see already with a knight on c4 and the pawn on b2 that the issue after queen a2 is not amusing. There is a mating threat on b2. Rook takes d4 just doesn't work, as the h1 is hanging, and if something like rook de1, this was played in the game, queen takes b2, king d1, queen b1 check, knight c1, and knight e3 check, the game ended in a very sad way. So let's go back. D takes e7. According to what we already have heard, when it's about defense, we always look first for an active decision and not for the most obvious one. I mean, of course, if the most obvious one is an active decision, why not? But here, d takes e7 is definitely not an active way. It gives our opponent time to increase the pressure, and we saw what just happened. So instead of d takes c7, what other moves do we have we can choose from? Of course, we have the move rook takes h8. This is also an obvious choice. We can think about whether this changes something. For example, we take on h8, d takes e7, and queen a2 again. Did anything change? I would say no, because if rook takes d4, at least the rook on h1 is not hanging anymore, but still the position is quite sad after the check on h1. And also here, White will not survive. So that means, well, instead of, let's say, rook takes d4, if rook e1, I believe something similar happens like in the game, to take on b2, to give the check on b1 and to play knight e3. Also, this position looks quite losing. That's why we should go back to the initial position and consider if instead of d takes e7, there's anything else which is helping us. And actually, since we know the rule about defense is first to look for active solutions, mating threats, because we need something which is so severe as a threat that queen a2 becomes unpopular. And this leads us to the move f5. f5 creates a mating threat because queen takes g6, king f8, and rook takes h8 is a mate. So it prevents queen a2. And now the question is, does this intermediate move help us to solve the issue or doesn't change anything? So after f5, what options does black have? Not many options, because if he takes on d6, then queen takes g6, queen g7, and the game is over. If he takes with a pawn, it's the same story, as h8 is hanging. If he first captures on h1 and then captures somewhere on d6, still the situation is not improving as all the pieces get into the position. So the only move, in my opinion, which is left is the move g takes f5. And now we see that with the move f5, we cleaned the diagonal for the queen. Sorry for the arrows. The arrow should be like this. Oops. Once again, the wrong arrow. Yes, it cleaned the diagonal for the queen. Queen now has access maybe to some important squares, which was not the case before. Now let's check d takes e7 again and queen a2. What did change is the fact that now with the intermediate check on e8, the queen is focusing or hitting on c7, which was not the case with the pawn on f4. And this changes everything in the position. The king cannot capture as h8 is hanging, and if something like rook takes e8, no matter which rook takes, then we can take on c7, attack c4, and actually White receives a winning position. So that means objectively f5 is saving the game and of course changing everything. Because the best thing which actually black can do here is to take on f5, and after d takes e7, not to allow the threat of e8 and queen takes c7, but to play something like knight e5. And objectively speaking, this position is quite unclear. I'm aware of this fact that this position is not typically about taking a decision here, but in general, in chess, you always have to take a decision. And the most important thing is, before you take the decision, critical thinking is very important. Because if you don't think carefully, if you don't collect at least a couple of candidate moves, if you only stick to one single move, then of course your decision might get not in the way you like it when the result at the end is wrong. That's why very important. In chess, we actually have to take always decisions. In every moment of the game. Tactical ones, defending ones. The help, however, is to take these decisions correctly, to follow some rules which are given when it's about defense, active defense, powerful moves, powerful threats. When it's about space advantage, then we know, like exchanging less pieces. I mean, stuff like this is anyway helping to facilitate the matter when it's about any kind of topic which arises on the board. But the most important thing is critical thinking, because first you have to think, then you have to decide. Otherwise, well, if you don't think carefully, whatever decision you take, there's a huge chance that it doesn't go the way you want.